I'm Naomi, 38, and I never imagined I'd witness my marriage unravel in a single quiet moment inside our apartment building's elevator. For years, I believed in the stability of my life with Jason, my husband of 12 years, but that night, everything changed. I'm about to tell you what I saw, what I felt, and how one small, silent elevator ride shifted my world. Before we dive in, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories on family drama, emotional courage, and personal strength. The day had been ordinary, mundane even. Work was long and tedious at the public library, shelving books, helping patrons find information, and carefully stacking returns. I remember leaving in the late evening, the sky dark and wet from a sudden drizzle, streets glistening with the reflection of neon signs from small local shops. I was tired, my shoulders sore, my hair damp from the drizzle, yet the thought of Jason waiting for me upstairs had kept me moving forward, eager for the comfort of home. Or so I thought. I pressed the elevator button in the lobby, my bag slung over my shoulder, the click of my heels echoing faintly against the tile floor. The lobby was empty, unusually quiet, which should have calmed me, but there was a strange, almost unnoticeable tension in the air. I shrugged it off, thinking it was my own nerves after a long day. As the doors slid open with a soft chime, the smell hit me first. Perfume, a delicate, floral scent that was unmistakably not mine. And then I saw them. Jason, my husband of over a decade, standing there with another woman. Their hands were linked, fingers intertwined like they had been countless times before. She leaned slightly toward him, whispering something I couldn't hear over the sudden pounding of my heart. And then, in a voice so soft it was almost inaudible, she said the words that froze me to the spot. "Who's that?" The world slowed, and for a moment I could barely breathe. Who's that? She didn't know me. She had no clue that I had shared my life, my home, my dreams, and my evenings with the man whose hand she now held. I wanted to scream, to run, to demand answers, but my body refused to obey. My hands trembled slightly, gripping my bag strap like it could anchor me to reality. Jason turned slowly, his eyes widening, not in surprise at the woman in front of him, but in shock at seeing me. I had expected anger, perhaps shame, but instead I saw something more complicated. A mix of guilt, panic, and the faintest flicker of regret. His grip on her hand didn't loosen immediately, and the sight of it, fingers wrapped around hers, ignited a storm inside me that I didn't even know I had been storing. For a brief moment, the elevator felt impossibly small. My chest tightened, and every instinct screamed at me to escape. Yet I stayed, frozen by a combination of disbelief and a desperate need to observe, to understand the reality of the man I thought I knew so well. I noticed the way she looked at me, confused, innocent, unaware. Her eyes were wide, almost startled, as though she had walked into an entirely new story she hadn't auditioned for. And in that glance, I saw not malice, but genuine bewilderment, which only made the betrayal cut deeper. I remember the metallic smell of the elevator, mixed with her perfume and Jason's cologne. It was intoxicatingly ordinary, yet the ordinary nature of it made the scene even more surreal. He was standing there, the man I had married, my partner in every sense, holding hands with someone who didn't know our life, our vows, our history. The quiet hum of the elevator's machinery contrasted violently with the chaos inside me. I don't know how long we all stood there in silence. Maybe 10 seconds, maybe 10 minutes. It felt like hours. Every second was heavy, laden with unspoken questions. I noticed the slight furrow in her brow, the way Jason's shoulders twitched, betraying the tension he tried to mask with a casual stance. I felt a surge of anger, hot and suffocating, but it was quickly tempered by an intense sadness that left me almost numb. The doors didn't open for what felt like eternity. Finally, the elevator dinged at the next floor, a simple mechanical sound that now seemed to mock me. Jason's hand lingered on hers for a fraction longer than it should have, and I could see the hesitation, the momentary struggle between guilt and desire. That hesitation, so fleeting yet so telling, was all the confirmation I needed. This wasn't a mistake or a momentary lapse. It was intentional. I finally spoke, though my voice was quieter than I expected, almost as if it were meant only for myself. "Jason," he flinched, like the sound had hit him physically. The other woman looked startled, glancing between us, still not understanding the full picture. "Naomi," he said almost pleadingly, but there was no strength in it, no explanation that could undo the shock. The elevator continued its descent, and I stayed silent. I didn't demand answers. I couldn't. Instead, I studied them both, cataloging every expression, every tiny detail that could help me understand how this had happened. The woman beside him seemed unaware of the depth of the betrayal. She smiled nervously, a hint of awkwardness on her face, but nothing more. In contrast, Jason avoided my eyes entirely, and the sight of his avoidance felt like a knife twisting in my chest. When the doors opened to the lobby floor, I stepped out, my legs heavy, my stomach tied in knots. I didn't shout, I didn't accuse, I didn't cry yet. I simply walked, as if my body had accepted the situation in a physical sense, but my mind refused to process it. The lobby was empty, save for a janitor pushing a cart down the hallway. He didn't notice anything unusual, and the normalcy of that moment only amplified the surrealness of my own experience. I remember the way the air smelled as I stepped into the lobby, a faint scent of rain from outside, mixed with the faint mustiness of the elevator, and how my senses seemed acutely aware of every detail. The sound of the rain hitting the pavement, the distant hum of traffic, the faint buzz of fluorescent lights overhead, all became background to the silent, explosive revelation that had just occurred. Walking back to my apartment, every step felt weighted. My mind was racing with questions. How long had this been going on? How could I have missed it? Did he ever love me? Or was our life together just another illusion? Each question felt like a tiny fracture spreading through my heart, threatening to shatter the life I had built around him. Once inside my apartment, I closed the door softly behind me, leaning against it for a moment, trying to steady my breath. The apartment felt impossibly large and empty, a stark contrast to the tiny, suffocating space of the elevator. I sat down on the couch, wrapping my arms around myself, feeling the tremor in my body. The room, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison of betrayal. I thought about the little things, small signs I had dismissed, the occasional late nights, the extra phone calls, the unexplained smiles when checking messages. I realized how expertly Jason had woven a double life, one that had coexisted alongside mine, without leaving obvious cracks. And yet, in that brief elevator encounter, all the cracks became glaringly visible, impossible to ignore. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment in the elevator over and over. Each time, I noticed new details. The way her hand rested in his, the subtle shift of his eyes when he noticed me, the confused glance she threw toward the floor numbers, as if trying to piece together why the world suddenly felt off kilter. The image was etched into my mind, refusing to fade. By the time I finally drifted into a restless, fragmented sleep, I knew nothing would ever be the same. That elevator, those few seconds, had shifted everything, my trust, my perception, my sense of reality. I had seen the truth, and there was no turning back. The next morning, I made a quiet vow to myself. I would uncover the full story. I wouldn't act in rage, nor would I confront blindly. I needed clarity, understanding, and the knowledge that I could reclaim my life, no matter what it took. And so, the night the elevator doors opened, and I saw them together, wasn't just the night my world cracked. It was the beginning of a journey that would demand strength, courage, and ultimately, a reclaiming of my own identity. The morning after that elevator encounter, the apartment felt heavier than the night before, though nothing had changed physically. I sat at the small kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a mug of lukewarm coffee, staring at the rising steam as if it could somehow dissolve the mess swirling inside me. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the wall clock, and the distant sounds of neighbors moving about their mornings all collided into a strange background noise that somehow amplified my internal storm. I was alone, yet I felt crushed under the weight of a truth I hadn't asked to witness. Jason wasn't home yet. Normally, I would have been excited to see him even after a long night, eager to talk about the mundane moments of our lives. But now, I felt a mixture of dread and calculation. I had questions, so many questions, and yet I knew that asking them immediately would only scatter my thoughts. My mind kept replaying the elevator scene, frame by frame. The way her hand fit into his, the hesitant glance he threw toward me, the whisper she had directed at him. Everything was subtle, yet it screamed the reality I had been avoiding for months. I tried to push the memories away by focusing on simple tasks. I washed the dishes left from last night, stacking them neatly in the drying rack. Yet each clink of porcelain felt like a punctuation mark on the betrayal I'd just witnessed. I wiped the counters, rearranged a few items on the shelf, even swept the floor twice, as if maintaining order in my small, ordinary apartment could impose some order on the chaos inside my heart. But the more I moved, the more restless I became. The truth wasn't in the chores. It was in the space between us, in the invisible fractures that had always been there, but now glared at me with startling clarity. By mid-morning, I found myself pacing back and forth across the living room, my bare feet scuffing the rug. I kept thinking about the little inconsistencies over the past months. Jason's sudden late-night meetings that didn't make sense, his distracted phone calls, his sometimes distant tone when I tried to share something personal. At the time, I had rationalized it as stress or work pressures. I had trusted him, perhaps blindly, and now I wondered if that trust had been misplaced. Every rationalization I had built around our marriage felt fragile, teetering on the edge of collapse. I couldn't stop thinking about her. The other woman. Who was she? Was she aware of my existence at all? Or had she believed he was single? Part of me, surprisingly, felt a strange sense of pity for her. I imagined her confusion, her excitement over a budding connection, and how completely oblivious she must have been to the life Jason had already committed to. And yet that same pity stung, because in her ignorance lay the evidence of my betrayal. It wasn't just that he was unfaithful. It was that he had managed to craft a double life so convincingly that two women could exist in his orbit, unaware of each other until that single elevator moment exposed it. The hours crawled by, and with each passing minute, my thoughts grew more tangled. I remembered little things about our marriage that now seemed suspiciously odd. The way Jason occasionally avoided answering questions directly, the faint nervous smile he gave when checking his phone, the excuses he offered for meetings that seemed unnecessary or vague. They all now seemed like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't wanted to see. Each memory was a small arrow pointing to the truth I was finally forced to confront. By early afternoon, Jason returned home. The sound of his keys jingling in the front door reverberated in my chest like a warning. I could feel my pulse quicken, my hands growing clammy as I sat frozen on the couch. He walked in as if nothing had happened, carrying his briefcase and casually placing his jacket on the coat rack. He smiled, but it was different from the smiles I had known, a practiced, uneasy lift of his lips. I could sense the underlying tension, and the way he avoided looking directly at me told me more than words ever could. "Morning, Naomi," he said lightly, as though a casual greeting could erase the dissonance between us. "Morning," I replied, my voice steady but cool, carefully neutral. I didn't want to give him the immediate reaction he might have been expecting. My mind was spinning, calculating, observing. I had to understand the truth before confronting him. We moved through our usual routines in silence. Jason made a sandwich while I sat at the kitchen table, sipping another cup of coffee, pretending to read a magazine. Every small gesture, every slight movement he made was now a potential clue. Did he show guilt? Did he fidget when the topic of work came up? Did he hope I wouldn't mention anything about last night? Each observation added layers to the storm in my mind. Around mid-afternoon, I finally broke the silence, testing the waters carefully. "You were late last night," I said casually, watching his reaction. He paused, fork in hand, and looked up. There was a moment of hesitation, a micro-expression that barely registered if one wasn't looking closely, but I caught it. His eyes darted away, then returned with a forced casualness. "Yeah, had some things to take care of at work," he said. A simple statement, but the lack of detail, the stiffness in his tone, made my instincts scream that something was wrong. I didn't press him further. Instead, I let the silence stretch, observing how he handled the tension. By evening, the storm in my mind had grown into a quiet but relentless pressure. I replayed every interaction I had with him over the past months, cross-referencing small anomalies with the elevator incident. I even began to notice things I hadn't paid attention to before. The subtle marks on his wrist where a watch strap had been adjusted, the faint scent of another perfume lingering on his jacket, the way he sometimes avoided casual physical contact with me. Every detail confirmed the suspicion that had rooted itself in my mind. He had been hiding a part of his life, and I had just glimpsed the surface of a much larger truth. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed beside him, pretending to rest, while my mind raced through scenarios. What would happen if I confronted him immediately? Would he deny it? Would he apologize? Or would he twist the story, gaslighting me into doubting my own senses? I realized that before I acted, I had to gather clarity, to observe, to piece together the puzzle of his deception. I decided to take notes, mental ones at first, then physical. I remembered every late night, every phone call he had shielded, every suspicious message notification he had dismissed as spam or work-related. I noted the exact times he had returned home late, the unusual excuses he had offered, and the rare smiles that didn't quite reach his eyes. Slowly, methodically, I started mapping the reality of the life we shared alongside the life he had secretly maintained. Over the next few days, I remained outwardly composed. I continued with my routine, visiting the library, handling errands, and maintaining the facade of normalcy. Yet beneath that surface, a quiet storm raged inside me, a mixture of heartbreak, betrayal, and a growing determination to face the truth. I began observing him more closely, the way he interacted with colleagues over the phone, his reactions to sudden text messages, and even how he carried himself around friends and neighbors. Each subtle gesture was a clue, a thread that might eventually unravel the full picture. And yet, amidst the emotional turmoil, I discovered something unexpected, a surprising clarity. The elevator moment, traumatic as it was, forced me to confront not only his betrayal, but also my own capacity for self-awareness and resilience. I realized I had been living with half-truths for years, excusing away signs that now seemed glaringly obvious. It was painful, yes, but also empowering. I could no longer hide from the reality before me. One evening, while sipping tea at the kitchen table, I noticed the faintest smudge of lipstick on his collar, a detail I had somehow missed before. My stomach sank, but my resolve strengthened. This was no longer about immediate anger or confrontation. It was about understanding the depth of the deception and preparing for the inevitable moment when the truth would demand acknowledgement. At the same time, I began to notice the subtle ways my emotions fluctuated. There were moments of anger, sharp and hot, that made my chest ache. Other moments brought deep sadness, tears that formed silently in my eyes as I thought of the life I had trusted him with. And occasionally, there were brief flashes of calm determination, moments where I could breathe, plan, and feel the quiet strength of someone who refused to be undone by betrayal. Each day brought new questions. Why had he felt the need to maintain this other life? How long had it been going on? Was she aware of me at all, or had she been another unwitting participant in his deception? And most importantly, what would I do with this knowledge once I had the full picture? I didn't yet have the answers, but the storm inside me demanded action. Not reckless confrontation, but careful, deliberate steps toward clarity. By the end of that week, I realized that I had entered a strange liminal space. Outwardly, life continued as usual. Jason still went to work. We still shared meals. The apartment still smelled like the comforting mix of coffee and laundry detergent. Yet beneath the surface, my perception had shifted entirely. I was no longer the same Naomi who had entered that elevator. I was someone alert, vigilant, and quietly resolute. The quiet storm that had begun the night I saw them together had transformed into a controlled fire, one that would guide my next actions with precision rather than panic. And so, I sat at my kitchen table one last time before sleep claimed me, sipping the faintly bitter tea, letting the silence of the apartment wrap around me. The storm raged still, yes, but it was no longer chaotic. It had become a lens, focusing my thoughts, clarifying my priorities, and preparing me for the truth I would have to face. I understood, in that moment, that the elevator had not only revealed his betrayal, but had also ignited my own awakening. The quiet storm had arrived, and I would meet it with eyes wide open. I knew I couldn't move forward without understanding her. Her story, the side of this tangled web that had been hidden from me just as I had been hidden from her. It wasn't enough to confront Jason with the truth I had discovered. I needed to meet the other woman face to face, not in anger, not with accusations, but with clarity and honesty. The day I decided to do it, my hands trembled, my stomach twisted into knots, but beneath it all, there was a strange mixture of anticipation and cautious hope. I reached out through a mutual acquaintance, a co-worker who had casually mentioned her name months ago. When she agreed to meet at a small cafe near the library, I felt a combination of nervousness and determination. The cafe was quiet, with warm amber lighting reflecting off wooden tables, a soft jazz tune floating in the background. It was the kind of place that encouraged conversation without intrusion, where words could be shared without judgment. I arrived early, clutching my purse, my heart pounding as I rehearsed the questions I might ask and the truths I needed to hear. She walked in a few minutes later, her presence immediately drawing my attention. She looked younger than me, perhaps in her late 20s, with light brown hair loosely tied back and a face that carried both warmth and vulnerability. She seemed unaware of the storm that had already reshaped my life, and for a moment I felt an odd empathy for her. I remembered the innocent confusion in her eyes that night in the elevator, and now seeing her in person, I realized just how oblivious she had been to everything else. "Hi," I said softly, trying to control the tremor in my voice. She looked up, startled, her brow furrowing slightly. "You're Naomi," she said slowly, as though piecing together a puzzle. I didn't know." Her voice trailed off, and I gestured for her to sit. "Yes," I replied, keeping my tone calm, neutral. "I think we need to talk about Jason." Her eyes widened, the initial shock giving way to curiosity and anxiety. She fidgeted with her coffee cup, twisting it slightly as if holding on to it could steady her nerves. I could sense that she had not anticipated this meeting, and part of me wondered how deeply she had been involved in his deception without realizing it. We began slowly sharing introductions that felt both mundane and profound. I listened as she recounted her side, the small ways Jason had introduced himself in her life, the charm he had displayed, the stories he had told her. He had presented himself as single, adventurous, and independent, subtly weaving a narrative that painted him as trustworthy yet unavailable to anyone else. Each detail she shared was like another thread in the tangled web I had glimpsed in the elevator, and I realized how carefully he had constructed a double life that allowed two separate worlds to coexist. She spoke hesitantly at first, pausing often, glancing down at her hands as if the truth itself weighed heavily on them. "I never knew he was married," she said finally, her voice small, almost fragile. I thought he was just lonely, looking for someone to talk to." Her admission struck me with a mixture of relief and frustration. Relief, because she had been as deceived as I had been. Frustration, because the depth of his manipulation was now more evident than ever. As the conversation unfolded, I realized the complexity of her story. She had met him at a local gym, where he had volunteered to help with training sessions. He had asked for her advice on small fitness routines, casually engaging in conversation that gradually became more personal. She had trusted him, confided in him, and shared details about her own life, her dreams, her family, her fears, without realizing that he already had another life, another woman who had given him her trust years ago. The realization made my chest tighten with a mixture of sadness and anger. We began tracing timelines together, comparing notes on his work hours, social events, and casual outings. I asked her about his phone calls, his vague excuses, and the moments when he seemed distant or distracted. She shared every detail she could remember, unaware that each fact was another piece of the puzzle, another confirmation of the pattern I had begun to notice in our own lives. It became clear that his lies had not been haphazard. They were meticulously crafted, designed to create plausible deniability and to maintain control over both of us without ever being caught until that fateful elevator moment. Our conversation shifted naturally from facts to feelings, and for the first time, I allowed myself to speak openly about my own hurt, my own sense of betrayal. I trusted him. I said softly, my voice quivering slightly, I believed in the life we built together. And now I see that he was living a completely different story somewhere else. She nodded, tears forming in her eyes, a mirror of the emotions I was trying to contain. "I can't believe I didn't see it," she whispered. "I never suspected. I thought I was careful, that I was smart, but he made me feel important, special, like I was the only one." Her words struck a chord in me. We were both victims of the same manipulation, and the realization brought a strange sense of solidarity between us. For the first time since the elevator, I felt that the storm inside me might find a temporary calm in understanding that I was not alone in this deception. We continued talking for hours, sipping coffee, occasionally pausing to collect our thoughts. She shared little details I had never known. The text messages he had sent her, the subtle compliments, the plans he had made that seemed harmless but were part of a calculated effort to create a connection. Each revelation added weight to the reality I was facing, the realization that Jason had spent years carefully crafting an illusion, one that allowed him to manipulate emotions and lives simultaneously. During our conversation, I noticed the small ways she began to piece together her own understanding. The confusion in her eyes slowly shifted to recognition, and then, finally, to resolve. "He can have both of us," she said quietly, more to herself than to me. "I deserve to know the truth, and so do you." Her voice was steady now, infused with a mix of clarity and courage that I had yet to feel fully. It was a moment of mutual awakening, two women, both deceived, beginning to reclaim their perspective and power in a situation orchestrated by someone else. As the afternoon waned, we talked about practical steps. She admitted she hadn't confronted him yet and wasn't sure how to approach the situation. I shared my thoughts cautiously, emphasizing clarity, honesty, and emotional composure. We agreed, silently but firmly, that our next actions would not be fueled by anger alone. Instead, we would act with purpose, gathering the truth, preparing ourselves emotionally, and maintaining the integrity of our own lives. The more I learned about her, the more I understood the scope of Jason's deceit. It wasn't just a single affair. It was an elaborate balancing act, one in which both of us were unknowingly cast as pawns. I realized that his charm, his attentiveness, his selective vulnerability, all had been tools in a larger game designed to keep both women invested while keeping himself insulated. And yet, in this realization, I found something unexpected, a sense of control returning to me. Knowledge, I realized, was power, and by learning her story, I was beginning to piece together the path forward. She shared small incidents that had puzzled her in hindsight: sudden cancellations, vague excuses, the way he sometimes avoided social gatherings with her, and the occasional overly casual references to his freedom that now seemed loaded with hidden meaning. Each anecdote was a breadcrumb, a marker of the web of lies I had only glimpsed in the elevator, but now began to see in its entirety. Together, we traced the outlines of a deceit that had been carefully maintained, yet was now unraveling thread by thread. By the end of our meeting, a quiet determination had settled over both of us. We understood the gravity of what we were facing, and the stakes had become unmistakably clear. Jason's web of lies was not merely a personal betrayal. It was a deliberate effort to manipulate and control, and it had hurt not only me but the woman sitting across from me. Yet, despite the pain, there was also a flicker of hope that we could confront this together with honesty and without allowing him to dictate the narrative of our lives any longer. As we parted ways, we exchanged numbers and agreed to stay in contact. There was no anger, no venom, only a shared understanding that the truth had to be faced, and that we would do so on our own terms. Walking back to my apartment, I felt a mix of exhaustion and cautious empowerment. The storm inside me had shifted slightly. It was no longer a chaotic, isolating force, but a focused, purposeful energy guiding me toward clarity. That night, I lay in bed, replaying every moment of our conversation. I thought about her experiences, her confusion, her vulnerability, and her growing resolve. I realized that understanding her story had given me not just insight into Jason's manipulations, but also a sense of solidarity, a recognition that we were both victims of someone else's choices. And in that recognition, I began to feel the first glimmer of strength, the realization that knowledge, understanding, and deliberate action could begin to heal the fractures his lies had caused. By the time I drifted into sleep, my mind was no longer swirling with the same chaos it had held after the elevator incident. Instead, I felt a quiet sense of purpose to confront the lies, to reclaim my narrative, and to navigate the next steps with intention and clarity. The quiet storm that had raged inside me after discovering his betrayal had grown into something different, a focused energy fueled not by despair, but by the knowledge that I could face the truth, no matter how painful, and begin to untangle the web of deception Jason had spun around both of our lives. The next day, a quiet resolve settled over me, heavier than any storm I had felt before. Naomi no longer simply felt betrayed. She was prepared. After speaking with the other woman, understanding her perspective, and tracing Jason's web of lies, I realized that waiting, analyzing, and collecting evidence would not only strengthen my position, but also protect my sanity. The confrontation I had been dreading was no longer something to fear. It was a necessary step to reclaiming my life. I arranged to meet her, the other woman, at a small laundromat we both frequented for convenience. It was neutral territory, public, but private enough to allow conversation and, if necessary, confrontation. The fluorescent lights above flickered faintly, casting an ordinary glow over the rows of washers and dryers. I arrived early, hands clasped, heart pounding, a storm of anticipation and fear swirling in my chest. I rehearsed nothing, letting the words come naturally, because rehearsing had always made emotions feel artificial. Today, I wanted raw honesty. She arrived minutes later, her expression cautious yet determined. I recognized in her eyes the same mix of resolve and apprehension that mirrored my own. Neither of us spoke immediately. Instead, we observed, silently acknowledging the gravity of what we were about to do. Then we saw him. Jason walked through the automatic doors, carrying his briefcase loosely in one hand, his jacket draped over his arm. His posture was casual, but the moment he saw the two of us standing together, something shifted. A subtle tension rippled through him, muscle twitching at the jaw, eyes narrowing slightly, the quickening of his step as if instinctively aware that he had walked into a trap he hadn't anticipated. "Jason," I said calmly, voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. He froze mid-step, a flicker of shock crossing his face, followed by that practiced, uneasy smile he often used to diffuse tension. Naomi, I didn't expect to see you here," he stammered. His eyes flicked to her, then back to me. For the first time, the confidence he always exuded seemed brittle, fragile, vulnerable. "I think you should sit," I said, motioning to the chairs near a corner. She did, and he followed hesitantly, setting his briefcase down beside him. The laundromat buzzed softly with the hum of dryers, the occasional squeak of carts on the tile floor, and faint conversations from other customers. Yet, amidst these ordinary sounds, the air between us felt taut, electric, like a wire stretched to its limit. I didn't waste time on small talk. "I know everything," I said, letting the words hang in the space between us. His eyes widened slightly, a micro-expression that betrayed the panic he immediately tried to mask. The other woman remained silent, her gaze fixed on him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "I saw you in the elevator," I continued, letting the memory of that moment fuel my calm authority. "I know about her." Jason swallowed, his Adam's apple moving rapidly as if trying to force words past a blockage. "Naomi, he began, but I interrupted. "No," I said firmly. "I need the truth. No excuses, no lies, no attempts to twist this. Everything you've done, I want it out in the open." His gaze flickered to the other woman, and for the first time, I saw fear. Not fear of me, but fear of exposure, fear of the lies unraveling. She spoke then, her voice steady but low, tinged with hurt. "Jason, tell us the truth. All of it. I trusted you." Her words were simple, unembellished, but the weight behind them was undeniable. The casual charm, the carefully crafted stories, the vague promises, all of it now demanded acknowledgement. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his hands fidgeting with the cuff of his sleeve. I didn't mean for it to happen this way," he began, but even as he spoke, the other woman shook her head slightly. "Don't start with excuses," she said. "Just tell us the truth. Tell us what you've been hiding from both of us." For the first time, I noticed the subtle details that had always been there but went unobserved. The way his hands trembled slightly, the tense set of his shoulders, the avoidance in his gaze. Every tiny movement betrayed the reality that he could no longer control the narrative. And as he began to speak, the words spilled out, hesitant at first, then with increasing urgency as he realized that concealment was impossible. He admitted to every detail, The casual lies, the careful manipulations, the plans he had orchestrated to keep the other woman unaware while maintaining his marriage. Each confession felt like a blow, confirming every suspicion, every clue I had gathered over the past week. But even as he spoke, I noticed something profound, a lack of remorse in his tone. There was guilt, yes, but not empathy, not a true acknowledgement of the pain he had inflicted. It was as if the act of confessing was more about self-preservation than understanding. I looked at her, the other woman, and saw her transformation in real time. Her confusion hardened into clarity, her hurt into determination. "So everything was a lie," she said, voice trembling but controlled. "Every promise, every plan, all of it was just to keep us both in line?" He didn't respond immediately, and in that pause, the weight of his actions became undeniable. I spoke then, my voice calm but firm, the first words I had allowed myself to fully feel. "Do you realize what you've done? Not just to me, but to her? To the trust we both placed in you?" He swallowed, attempting to speak, but no words came that could undo the damage. And in that silence, the truth settled like a stone, heavy and immovable. The confrontation continued, each moment building upon the last, exposing layers of deception I hadn't fully imagined. I asked questions, specific, pointed, deliberate, about late nights, odd excuses, hidden phone calls, and unexplained absences. He answered, each time revealing more than he intended. There was no charm, no deflection, only the stark reality of exposure. Every answer chipped away at the carefully constructed persona he had used to manipulate both of us. And then, a moment I hadn't expected, a small crack in the armor. He looked directly at me, his eyes wide, the faintest flicker of regret crossing his face. "Naomi, I never wanted to hurt you," he whispered, but it was too late. Words could not repair the fracture. Not now, not after years of lies. I realized in that instant that my role in this confrontation was not to forgive but to witness, to understand, and to reclaim the truth for myself. The other woman spoke again, her voice firmer this time. "We need to end this. I can't be part of it anymore, and you need to face what you've done." Her clarity was striking, a mirror of the resolve that had begun forming within me. We were no longer victims of confusion. We were witnesses to the full extent of his deception, and the power now shifted away from him. He slumped in the chair, the weight of his lies finally breaking through. There were no more defenses, no more attempts at charm or manipulation. Only truth, stark and undeniable, laid bare before both of us. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't anticipated, a sense of liberation, a quiet but profound recognition that the confrontation had given me something he could not take away: clarity. We didn't yell, we didn't storm out, we didn't dramatize the moment. Instead, we listened, absorbed, and let the truth settle around us. And as the laundromat hummed quietly with its ordinary sounds, I realized that the confrontation had changed everything, not just for him, but for both of us. It was a turning point, a moment of undeniable reckoning, and the first step toward reclaiming our lives from someone who had tried to control them through deception. By the time we parted ways, the other woman and I exchanged a glance that needed no words. There was understanding, solidarity, and a quiet, shared resolve. Jason, for the first time, could see the consequences of his choices fully reflected in our eyes, and the power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. I walked home that evening, the city streets buzzing with life, yet I felt a calm settle over me. The confrontation had been terrifying, exhausting, and painful, but it had also been liberating. The storm within me had found its voice, and the truth that had once seemed elusive now stood firmly in my grasp. I knew then that the next steps, decisions about the future, about trust, about life, would not be dictated by fear, confusion, or manipulation. They would be guided by clarity, by understanding, and by the knowledge that I had faced the truth fully and without compromise. The confrontation had changed everything. It had exposed lies, revealed character, and restored agency. And most importantly, it had reminded me of a truth I had almost forgotten. My life, my decisions, and my worth were mine alone. After the confrontation, the city felt different. The streets, once familiar, seemed to hum with possibilities instead of anxiety. The lingering chaos in my mind, the relentless questioning of who Jason was and what our marriage meant, had begun to settle into something I could almost recognize as clarity. I walked slowly home that evening, the crisp autumn air brushing against my cheeks, carrying with it a subtle hint of wood smoke from nearby chimneys. It reminded me, almost painfully, that life continued around me even when my world had been shattered. That night, I didn't call Jason. I didn't need to. I didn't need validation, apologies, or explanations anymore. I needed solitude, reflection, and the quiet strength that comes only from reclaiming your own sense of self. I poured myself a cup of chamomile tea, sat at my kitchen table, and let my thoughts wander freely. I remembered the long years of shared laughter, the mundane routines we once took comfort in, and the illusions that had been built alongside them. Painful as it was, those memories were mine, part of my story, and I allowed myself to acknowledge them without judgment. Sleep came fitfully, and when I awoke, I felt the subtle but undeniable shift within me. I was no longer Naomi, who had been blindsided, paralyzed by disbelief. I was Naomi who had faced betrayal, confronted lies, and chosen to prioritize her own peace above the chaos someone else had inflicted. The decision wasn't immediate. It had been slow, deliberate, and weighted with every ounce of emotional energy I could summon. But in that morning's sunlight spilling softly through my curtains, I felt the first real sense of liberation. The first practical step in my new beginning was reclaiming my space. Jason had moved out temporarily after the confrontation, and for the first time in years, the apartment was truly mine. I rearranged furniture, bought new linens, and even planted a few small potted flowers on the windowsill. Each action, seemingly trivial, felt symbolic, an assertion that I had control over my life again. The physical environment shifted in tandem with my internal state. The cluttered corners of doubt and hurt were replaced with order and intentionality. The apartment reflected the calm I was slowly cultivating within myself. I also reached out to friends I hadn't spoken to in months, letting them know I needed support, not pity, not judgment, just presence. Dinner with one close friend became a weekly ritual, laughter returning to my life in small doses, each chuckle a tiny reclamation of the joy I thought had been stolen. I began journaling not as a record of sorrow, but as a practice in clarity. Each word written on paper served as a tool, helping me process the layers of deception, grief, and awakening that the past weeks had demanded. Work became another anchor. I threw myself into projects with focus and purpose, finding satisfaction in completing tasks that required diligence and skill. Colleagues noticed the shift in my demeanor. There was a quiet confidence in the way I carried myself now, a sense that, despite the upheaval, I was grounded. Each small success, each acknowledgement, served as a reminder that my life was still capable of progress, still capable of meaningful achievement independent of the chaos Jason had left behind. Evenings became my sanctuary. I would walk through the city streets, observing the world around me, the way the streetlights glimmered on wet pavement after a drizzle, the aroma of fresh bread from a nearby bakery, the distant laughter of children in a park. These ordinary moments, previously overlooked, now felt extraordinary. They reminded me that life was more than one person's deceit. There were still experiences to savor, small joys to embrace, and a future that was no longer dictated by fear or manipulation. Of course, the emotional storm wasn't gone entirely. There were moments when grief and anger surged unexpectedly, triggered by a song on the radio, a memory of shared laughter, or even the sight of a couple walking hand in hand. But I no longer allowed these moments to define me. I observed them, acknowledged them, and let them pass without judgment. In a way, I had learned that emotional resilience isn't about erasing pain. It's about learning to carry it without letting it crush you. Each surge was a reminder of my own capacity to endure, to process, and ultimately to emerge stronger. I also began exploring new passions, small but meaningful. Photography, something I had loved in college but abandoned for work and routine, became a way to document the world as I experienced it anew. I would walk for hours, camera in hand, capturing mundane scenes transformed into intimate stories of light, shadow, and human connection. Through the lens, I realized how much life existed outside of the confines of my pain. Every snapshot was a reminder that beauty could coexist with heartbreak, and that I had the power to choose which moments to focus on. Social life returned gradually. I joined a local book club, attended weekend yoga classes, and even began volunteering at a nearby animal shelter. Each new experience, no matter how small, became a thread in the fabric of my renewed life. I discovered that engagement with the world, with people, and with meaningful tasks could replace the void left by betrayal. It was not an overnight transformation, but a deliberate, measured reconstruction of identity and purpose. I also confronted the lingering question of forgiveness, both for Jason and for myself. I realized I didn't need to forgive him immediately, nor did I need to condone his actions. But I did need to forgive myself for allowing my trust to be exploited. I had been deceived, yes, but I had also been brave enough to face the truth, to seek clarity, and to reclaim control. That realization brought a gentle sense of peace, the understanding that self-compassion was not weakness, but strength. Through this process, I discovered an inner resilience I hadn't recognized before. There were quiet mornings when I would sit by the window with my coffee, sunlight warming my face, feeling a profound sense of gratitude for life's continuity. The apartment, once a site of betrayal, now felt like a sanctuary. The city, once indifferent and chaotic, now seemed alive with opportunity. And most importantly, I felt connected to myself again. Not defined by another person's deceit, but by my own values, choices, and capacity for renewal. One afternoon, I received a message from the other woman. She wanted to meet for lunch, just to share updates on our progress in moving forward. We laughed over small anecdotes about life after the confrontation, shared advice, and offered each other quiet encouragement. The solidarity we had built remained intact, a testament to the strength found in shared understanding. It reminded me that even in betrayal, unexpected bonds could form, providing support and perspective that accelerated healing. Weeks turned into months, and the transformation became tangible. I noticed how my posture had shifted, how my voice carried confidence, how my presence in spaces was no longer tentative but assured. Friends remarked on the glow returning to my face, the ease with which I navigated conversations, and the calmness that radiated even in moments of tension. Each compliment, each observation, reinforced the sense that the choices I had made, the choice to confront, to reclaim, to rebuild, were valid and transformative. In retrospect, the pain I had endured was not erased, but integrated into a broader narrative of growth. I realized that the storm, the confrontation, and the betrayal had been catalysts for self-discovery. They had forced me to confront limits, recognize boundaries, and cultivate resilience. I no longer feared solitude, uncertainty, or change. Instead, I embraced them as opportunities to affirm my agency, values, and inner strength. By the end of the year, I had moved into a slightly larger apartment, decorating it with personal touches that reflected my journey: photographs, plants, books, and art pieces collected on solo adventures. I hosted small gatherings, shared meals, and allowed laughter to fill the spaces that once echoed with silence and tension. Each act of living fully, intentionally, and authentically became a reaffirmation that my life had shifted, not in spite of the pain, but because I had faced it head on. Most importantly, I had learned to cherish peace. Not a peace born of avoidance, denial, or suppression, but a peace cultivated through understanding, reflection, and conscious choice. It was the quiet knowledge that I could endure betrayal, navigate grief, and emerge stronger, not diminished, not dependent on someone else's actions, but fully capable of creating my own joy, stability, and meaning. As I stood by the window one crisp morning, sunlight filtering through the curtains, sipping my coffee, and watching the city awaken, I realized how far I had come. The betrayal that had once threatened to define me was now a chapter in my life, not the whole story. I was Naomi, stronger, wiser, and fully alive. The new beginning I had chosen wasn't just a fresh start. It was a reclamation of my life, my choices, and my peace. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. Looking back now, I realized that everything I endured, the shock, the betrayal, the heartbreak, and even the moments of self-doubt, was shaping me in ways I never could have imagined. Pain has a way of revealing truths about ourselves, about the people around us, and about what we are truly capable of carrying. I used to think that being hurt, being deceived, was something to be ashamed of, as if my trust or my love had been foolish. But now I understand that it was not foolish. It was human. It was the willingness to believe in someone else, to open my heart, and to allow life to unfold with hope. And even though that hope was broken, it did not break me. In fact, it taught me the most valuable lesson of all, that my worth, my happiness, and my peace are mine to protect, nurture, and reclaim, no matter what storms pass through my life. I have learned to embrace silence and solitude, not as loneliness, but as space for reflection, growth, and clarity. I have learned that confrontation, while painful, is sometimes necessary, not to punish someone else, but to liberate yourself from the weight of lies. I have learned that strength is not the absence of tears or fear, but the courage to face them head-on and continue moving forward. Each day, I remind myself that I am allowed to rebuild, to rediscover, and to redefine who I am without being tethered to the choices of someone who failed to honor me. And with every small act of self-care, every conversation with a friend, every walk through the city streets, I feel that peace settle a little deeper into my bones, a peace that is earned, not given, and one that no one can take from me. I no longer dwell on what I lost. Instead, I focus on what I have gained: freedom, clarity, resilience, the ability to love again, not recklessly or blindly, but wisely, with the knowledge that trust is precious and must be respected both by others and by myself. I have discovered a quiet joy in simple moments: a cup of coffee in the morning sunlight, laughter shared with a friend, the smell of fresh rain on the pavement, the thrill of capturing a perfect photograph of something ordinary made extraordinary. These moments, once overlooked, now remind me that life continues, that beauty exists even after betrayal, and that happiness is not dependent on anyone but me. Most importantly, I have learned to forgive, not to absolve someone else of their choices, but to release the burden of anger and resentment from my own heart. Forgiveness is not weakness, it is liberation. It allows me to move forward with clarity, to open my heart to new possibilities, and to live fully without carrying the shadows of past pain. My journey through betrayal and heartbreak was harrowing, but it was also transformative. I have emerged stronger, wiser, and more deeply connected to myself than ever before. And so, I choose to walk forward with intention, courage, and grace. I choose a life defined not by the lies of someone else, but by my own choices, my own strength, and my own capacity to love, grow, and find peace. This is my new beginning, the life I have chosen, the peace I have earned, and the hope that no storm, no matter how violent, can ever take away again.